In the backyard of a luxurious home in one of Florida's most exclusive gated communities, a woman was found at the bottom of a swimming pool. The chilling detail that made investigators pause her shoes was still on her feet. Was this a tragic slip and fall, or was it a perfectly staged murder disguised as an accident in the very place that should have been safest, her own home? And the first person under suspicion was the one closest to her. If you want to follow this twisted tale of wealth betrayal and a death that wasn't what it seemed, subscribe to our channel now. This is a story where nothing is as it appears on the surface. This is the story of Samira Frasch, a case that would shake Tallahassee, Florida, and reveal how a fairy tale life can hide the darkest secrets. Behind the mansion walls and designer clothes lay a marriage in ruins, and on February the 22nd, 2014, that conflict would end in death. The question that would haunt investigators and eventually a jury was simple yet profound. Was this an accident, or was this murder? Samira Frasch was 38 years old when her life came to a tragic end. Born in Madagascar, she possessed an exotic beauty that turned heads wherever she went. She had worked as a model, and her striking appearance was matched by a vibrant, outgoing personality. Those who knew her described a woman who loved fashion, who doted on her children, and who embraced life with passion. She was a devoted mother to two young daughters, girls who would become the center of her world and ultimately a focal point in the dissolution of her marriage. Her husband, Adam Frasch, was 46 years old and a successful podiatrist in Tallahassee. He had built a thriving practice and enjoyed the fruits of his labor with expensive tastes. He loved high-stakes gambling, luxury cars, and as would later be revealed, the company of women other than his wife. On the surface, Adam presented the image of a successful doctor and family man. Beneath that veneer, however, lay patterns of behavior that would eventually unravel everything. Their love story began in Paris in 2006, the City of Light providing the romantic backdrop for their first meeting. Adam was immediately captivated by Samira's beauty, and their whirlwind romance led to marriage in 2009. Samira moved to the United States, leaving her life in Madagascar behind to build a new future with Adam. They settled into the exclusive Golden Eagle gated community in Tallahassee, a neighborhood that represented wealth, security, and prestige. Together they had two beautiful daughters, and from the outside, their life appeared to be a dream come true. But by the summer of 2013, the dream had shattered. The marriage that had begun with such promise in Paris had deteriorated into bitter warfare. Adam and Samira were living separate lives under the same roof, a situation that created tension and hostility within the walls of their lavish home. They were in the midst of a contentious divorce, and the stakes were extraordinarily high. Samira held powerful cards in this battle. She had gathered evidence of Adam's infidelity, documenting his affairs with other women. More significantly, she had uncovered evidence of what she claimed was financial fraud in his medical practice. Armed with this information, Samira was demanding sole custody of their two young daughters and a substantial portion of their marital assets. For Adam, this divorce threatened not just his marriage, but potentially his career, his reputation, and his relationship with his children. To those on the outside, the Frasch family still appeared to be living a fairy tale. They drove expensive cars, wore designer clothes, and resided in a mansion that embodied success. But those closest to them knew the truth. Behind closed doors, a war was being waged, and the casualties were mounting. The life that looked so glamorous from the outside was concealing battles that would prove to be deadly. February 22nd, 2014 began like many other days in the Golden Eagle community. The sun rose over manicured lawns and palatial homes. But this day would be different. This was the day that would transform the Frasch residence from a home into a crime scene. The discovery was made by a handyman who had come to work on the property. He found Samira Frasch in the swimming pool in the backyard. She was fully clothed, and her shoes or sandals were found in the pool area. At first glance, the scene could have been interpreted as a tragic accident. Perhaps she had slipped and fallen into the pool. Perhaps she had been intoxicated and lost her balance. The initial assessment seemed straightforward. But as investigators began to examine the scene more closely, questions began to emerge. Why was she fully dressed? If this was an accidental drowning, why were there certain inconsistencies at the scene? And most importantly, where was her husband, Adam? And what was his account of the hours leading up to this tragedy? Adam Frasch's story was that he had left the house the night before with the couple's 2 daughters. According to his account, Samira had been drinking heavily that evening. He claimed that a woman named Dixie had come to the house and had gotten into an argument with Samira. Wanting to remove the children from this volatile situation, Adam said he packed up the girls and drove to Panama City, leaving Samira alone at the house to sleep off her intoxication. This narrative initially seemed plausible. Couples in the midst of bitter divorces often have heated confrontations. A spouse leaving with the children to protect them from conflict is understandable, but as investigators dug deeper, the story began to fall apart like a house of cards. The autopsy results would prove to be the turning point that transformed this case from a potential accident into a homicide investigation. The medical examiner found significant bruising on Samira's face and head. These injuries were inconsistent with a simple slip and fall. The official determination was homicide, with the cause of death listed as blunt force head trauma combined with drowning. Further evidence complicated Adam's narrative even more. DNA evidence was recovered from underneath Samira's fingernails, and testing would later reveal it matched Adam Frasch. This suggested there had been a physical struggle between husband and wife. Adam had claimed Samira was intoxicated, using this to explain how she might have fallen into the pool. However, the toxicology report contradicted this entirely. There was no alcohol in Samira's system at the time of death. Perhaps most damning to Adam's story was the mysterious Dixie. Investigators searched exhaustively for any evidence that a woman by this name had visited the Frasch home that night. They examined security camera footage from the gated community. They analyzed phone records and interviewed neighbors. Despite their thorough investigation, they could find no evidence that Dixie existed. No one saw her enter or leave the community. No phone records placed her in contact with either Adam or Samira. The conclusion was inescapable. Dixie was a fiction, a character Adam had invented to provide an alternative explanation for any signs of conflict at the scene. The investigation had now shifted from determining how Samira died to building a case against her husband. Detectives worked to construct a timeline of Adam's movements and to understand the full scope of what had happened in those critical hours. The prosecution's theory would eventually paint a disturbing picture. They believed that Adam, facing a divorce that could cost him everything, had attacked Samira. The blunt force trauma to her head suggested he had struck her with a heavy object, possibly rendering her unconscious or severely disoriented. He then placed her in the swimming pool where she drowned, hoping to stage the scene to look like an accidental drowning. The defense team had a different interpretation of events. They argued that the time of death was uncertain, and that Adam's alibi, placing him in Panama City with his daughters, was solid. They contended that someone else could have been responsible, and that the prosecution's case relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence. The defense emphasized that there was no direct evidence placing Adam at the scene at the exact moment of Samira's death. As the investigation progressed, more evidence came to light. Witnesses who saw Samira after Adam claimed to have left became crucial to the prosecution's timeline. These testimonies helped establish when Samira was last seen alive and created a narrower window for when the crime could have occurred. One of the most controversial pieces of evidence would come from an unexpected source. A jailhouse informant, a cellmate of Adam's, came forward with explosive claims. According to this witness, Adam had confessed to the murder while they were incarcerated together. The informant alleged that Adam had described striking Samira with a hard object, possibly a golf club, and then pushing her into the pool to make it look like an accident. Jailhouse informant testimony is notoriously problematic in criminal cases. Such witnesses often have their own motivations for cooperating with authorities, including the possibility of reduced sentences for their own crimes. Defense attorneys typically challenge the credibility of these witnesses vigorously. However, in this case, the testimony added another piece to the puzzle that prosecutors were assembling. The trial of Adam Frasch became a battle between two competing narratives. The prosecution presented their case built on a foundation of motive opportunity and physical evidence. Adam had a clear motive. The contentious divorce threatened his wealth, his reputation, and his relationship with his daughters. He had opportunity. He was at the home with Samira the night before her death. The physical evidence, including the bruising, the DNA under her fingernails, and the staged appearance of the scene, all pointed to his guilt. The prosecution argued that Adam had carefully planned this murder to look like an accident. He had struck Samira, causing the head trauma, and then placed her in the pool. He then left with his daughters, establishing an alibi by driving to Panama City. When Samira's body was discovered the next day, he could claim he had been hours away. It was, they argued, a calculated attempt at the perfect murder. The defense countered by attacking the uncertainty around the precise time of death. If the timing could not be established with certainty, then Adam's alibi remained viable. They pointed out that the prosecution's case was built largely on circumstantial evidence, and the testimony of witnesses whose credibility could be questioned, particularly the jailhouse informant. They argued that reasonable doubt existed, and that the jury should not convict based on a theory no matter how compelling without definitive proof. The trial drew significant media attention. Here was a case that had everything: wealth, beauty, betrayal, and murder. The image of Samira, the beautiful model and devoted mother, contrasted sharply with the allegations against Adam, the successful doctor accused of killing his wife. The courtroom proceedings would determine not just Adam's fate, but also provide answers to the community about what had really happened in that backyard pool. The jury heard weeks of testimony. They examined photographs of the scene, reviewed autopsy reports, and listened to expert witnesses explain the forensic evidence. They heard from people who knew the couple and could speak to the state of their marriage. They considered the testimony of the jailhouse informant and weighed its credibility. They examined the timeline and Adam's movements on the day Samira died. In 2017, the jury reached their verdict. Adam Frasch was found guilty of first-degree murder. The conviction meant that the jury had concluded beyond a reasonable doubt that Adam had intentionally killed Samira and that this killing was premeditated. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Adam, this was not the end. He filed an appeal, as is the right of any convicted defendant. His legal team argued that errors had been made during the trial that prejudiced the outcome. They challenged the admission of certain evidence and the handling of witness testimony. The appeals process would take time, but in 2019, the appellate court issued its decision. The conviction was upheld. The court found that Adam Frasch had received a fair trial and that the evidence supported the jury's verdict. Today, Adam Frasch remains in prison serving his life sentence. Two young girls grew up without their mother, who was taken from them in the swimming pool of their own home. They also lost their father, not to death, but to the prison system after his conviction for taking their mother's life. The Samira Frasch case serves as a sobering reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Behind the gates of exclusive communities and the facades of beautiful homes, darkness can lurk. It reminds us that domestic violence and marital conflict can escalate to unthinkable violence, and that financial pressures and failing relationships can drive people to commit acts they might never have imagined. This case also illustrates the importance of thorough investigation and the application of forensic science in seeking justice. The initial appearance of an accident was challenged by careful examination of the evidence. The bruising, the DNA, the absence of alcohol in the toxicology report, and the fabricated story about Dixie all combined to reveal the truth. It took the dedicated work of investigators, prosecutors, and the judicial system to ensure that Samira's death did not go unpunished. For the two daughters left behind, the tragedy is immeasurable. They lost their mother to violence and their father to the consequences of that violence. Their story reminds us that behind every crime statistic, every trial and every conviction are real people whose lives are forever altered. The case of Samira Frasch teaches us that justice, while sometimes slow and complex, can prevail when evidence is carefully gathered and presented. It reminds us of the critical importance of the rule of law and the need for thorough, impartial investigation in all cases where lives have been lost under suspicious circumstances. What do you think about this case? Based on the facts presented at trial, do you believe justice was served? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to our channel to follow more mysterious and chilling true crime cases like this one. Each case we cover reminds us of the complexity of human nature and the importance of seeking truth, no matter how well hidden it might be.